Parents, would you answer the door if your child returned, but opening it meant breaking the law? My son stood on my porch and I watched him through the security camera on my phone. Caleb's fist pounded against the door. 3 hard, frantic knocks that echoed through my house. Mom! His voice was muffled but desperate. Mom, please, I know you're there. He tried the doorknob, rattling it. His other hand pressed against the door like he might try to force it open. He was 15 feet away from me. I was sitting in my dark living room in complete darkness with my phone glowing in my hand. 6 months had passed since I last saw him. 6 months of not knowing if he was alive or dead or hurt somewhere. And now he was here. His fist hitting the door again. Harder this time. His voice cracking as he called my name. I could see how thin he looked through the camera. How his whole body trembled. Not just scared, but frantic. Like he was running out of time. I stood up from the couch and took 2 steps toward the front door before I stopped myself. My hand was already reaching for the deadbolt when I remembered what the lawyer told me. What the detective told me. What the judge's order said in black and white legal language that left no room for interpretation. Opening this door would make me a criminal. Federal prison. Years of my life are gone. My other children left without a mother. Everything I built was destroyed. But Caleb was standing right there. His forehead now pressed against my door, and I could see him shaking. He turned to leave, and I watched him take 3 steps down my walkway. Every muscle in my body wanted to run to that door. My finger hovered over the screen. I had Detective Ruiz on speed dial. That was part of the arrangement. The moment Caleb appeared, I was supposed to call. They would be here in minutes. They had people watching my street, monitoring my phone, waiting for exactly this moment. I looked at Caleb's back as he walked away, and my hand moved to the deadbolt. This was the choice. Right now. Let him disappear into whatever darkness he had been hiding in for 6 months, or open the door and accept everything that came with it. I turned the lock. The sound was so loud in the quiet house that I was certain someone outside heard it. Caleb stopped walking. He stood completely still in my front yard with his back to me. I opened the door 6 inches and whispered his name. He turned around, and the look on his face broke something inside me that I did not know could still break. 3 minutes later, Caleb was inside my house, and I had locked every door and drawn every curtain. We stood in my kitchen and did not speak because I think we both understood that the moment we started talking, everything would become real. I could see now how much weight he had lost. His clothes hung off his frame like they belonged to someone else. His face was hollow, and there was a healing cut above his left eyebrow that looked like it had needed stitches but never got them. His hands would not stop shaking. I asked if he was hurt, and he shook his head, but I did not believe him. I asked if anyone followed him, and he said he did not think so, but he was not sure anymore. He said he had been so careful. He had waited in the woods behind my house for hours watching the street. He saw the unmarked car 3 houses down. He knew they were watching for him, but he had to risk it because he was out of options and out of time, and I was the only person left who might help him. I pulled him into my basement because it was the only room without windows. My hands were shaking worse than his now because the reality was setting in. I had just committed a federal crime. In the next few hours or days, someone would find out. Maybe they already knew. Maybe there were cameras I did not know about. Maybe the surveillance team saw him slip into my garage or heard something or had thermal imaging equipment that showed 2 heat signatures in my house instead of 1. I sat Caleb down on the old couch and told him he needed to explain everything right now. Why did he run? Why did the police want him? Why opening my door just destroyed my life? He looked at me with exhausted eyes and said, "Mom, I saw something 6 months ago that I was never supposed to see. And the person I saw is powerful enough to make me disappear." I asked who. He said Deputy District Attorney Richard Krause. I felt my stomach drop because I knew that name. Everyone in the city knew that name. Krause had been on the news for years, the tough-on-crime prosecutor who never lost a case. Caleb told me he witnessed Krause murder someone. He said it with no emotion in his voice, like he was reading from a script he had memorized. I asked him to start from the beginning and tell me everything. He leaned back against the couch and closed his eyes. 6 months ago, he was driving home from his late shift at the physical therapy clinic. His car overheated on Highway 9 near the industrial district. He pulled into a warehouse parking lot to let the engine cool. The lot was empty except for a black SUV parked near the back fence. Caleb said he was looking at his phone, checking how long until a tow truck could come when he heard voices. 2 men arguing. He looked up and saw them standing next to the SUV. One man was in a suit. The other wore jeans and a jacket. They were yelling about money and someone being a liability. Caleb said he should have driven away right then, even with his engine overheating, but he was tired and not paying close attention, and then everything happened so fast, he did not have time to react. The man in the suit pulled out a gun. The other man put his hands up and started backing away. Caleb said he remembered thinking this cannot be real. Things like this did not happen in real life, but then the man in the suit fired and the other man dropped. Just like that. One second he was alive and talking, and the next he was dead on the pavement. Caleb said he froze. He could not move or think or do anything except stare. The man in the suit stood over the body for a moment and then looked around the parking lot. That is when he saw Caleb sitting in his car maybe 40 feet away. Their eyes met. Caleb said the man smiled. Not a nervous smile or an "oh no, I got caught" smile. A calm smile like he was not worried at all. Then the man walked toward Caleb's car, and Caleb's brain finally started working again. He tried to start his engine, but it would not turn over. The man in the suit reached Caleb's window and tapped on the glass with the gun. Caleb rolled down the window because what else could he do? The man leaned in close and said, "Do you know who I am?" Caleb told me he recognized him then. He had seen his face on billboards around the city. Richard Krause, Deputy District Attorney. The man who put criminals away. Except right now he was holding a gun that he just used to kill someone, and he was looking at Caleb like he was deciding something. Krause told Caleb that no one would believe him if he talked. Krause had friends everywhere. Police, judges, prosecutors. Caleb was a nobody. A physical therapy assistant with no connections and no power. Who would take his word over a decorated prosecutor? Then Krause pulled out his phone and showed Caleb a photo. It was my house. My address was visible on the mailbox. Krause said, "Nice place. Your mom still lived there." He said it would be a shame if something happened to her. Then he walked back to his SUV, made a phone call, and within minutes, police cars arrived. Caleb watched officers secure the scene. He watched Krause talk to them and point at the body. He watched them treat Krause like a witness instead of a killer. That is when Caleb understood he could not go to the police. Krause controlled them. Caleb drove home on his overheating engine and spent the rest of that night trying to figure out what to do. He called his friend Leo, who was pre-law, and asked hypothetically what happens if you witness a crime, but the criminal is a prosecutor. Leo said you go to the FBI because they handle corruption cases. So the next morning, Caleb called the FBI field office and asked to speak to someone about a murder. They took his information and said someone would call back within 24 hours. 3 hours later, federal agents showed up at his apartment. The lead agent was a woman named Voss. She had 2 other agents with her, and they all wore suits and serious expressions. Voss told Caleb they had been investigating Krause for corruption for 2 years. Multiple witnesses had come forward claiming Krause was connected to organized crime and was taking bribes to throw cases. But nothing stuck because witnesses kept recanting or disappearing. Now Caleb had seen Krause commit murder. This was the break they needed. Voss said Caleb would go into protective custody immediately. He would testify before a grand jury and eventually at trial. It might take a year or more, but they would keep him safe. Caleb asked what protective custody meant. Voss explained he would leave his apartment that day and go to a secure location. He could not contact anyone, including me. He could not go to work or access his bank accounts or use his phone. He would essentially disappear until the trial was over. Caleb said he needed time to think about it. Voss said there was no time. Krause already knew Caleb saw him. Every hour Caleb stayed exposed was an hour Krause could act. Caleb asked what would happen to me if Krause came after his family. Voss said they would monitor my house and keep me safe. Caleb asked if she could promise that. Voss hesitated. She said they would do everything possible, but she could not make guarantees. That hesitation told Caleb everything he needed to know. The FBI could not protect him or me. Not really. Not from someone with Krause's resources and connections. So Caleb told Voss he needed to go to work and pack some things, and he would meet them later that day at the field office. Voss did not like it, but she agreed. She gave Caleb her card and said to call the moment he was ready. Caleb went back to his apartment and packed a bag. Then he ran. He told me he spent the first week sleeping in his car and moving every few hours. He withdrew all his cash from ATMs, knowing it would create a trail, but needing money more than he needed to stay hidden. He turned off his phone and threw it in a dumpster. He bought a burner phone with cash at a convenience store. He drove to different cities and stayed in cheap motels under fake names. He grew a beard and cut his hair short. He did everything he could think of to disappear, but he kept seeing the same cars following him. Or he thought he did. He was not sure anymore if he was being paranoid or if Krause really had people hunting him. After 2 weeks, his car broke down completely, and he had to sell it for scrap. He started staying in shelters. He did odd jobs for cash, construction, and landscaping and warehouse work. He moved constantly. He did not call me because he knew they would be monitoring my phone. He wanted to so badly. Every single day he wanted to hear my voice and know I was okay, but he could not risk leading Krause to me. I asked why he came back now after staying hidden for 6 months. Caleb's face changed. He looked sick. He said 2 days ago he saw a news report about the murder case. The man Krause killed was named Victor Mendez. Mendez was a real estate developer who apparently had connections to organized crime. The police had arrested someone for his murder. a man named Anthony Lopez who had a prior record and weak alibi. The news showed Deputy District Attorney Krause at a press conference talking about justice being served and dangerous criminals being taken off the streets. Caleb realized what happened. They framed Lopez. Without Caleb's testimony, an innocent man was going to prison for life for a murder Krause committed. Caleb said he could not let that happen. He had been hiding to save himself, but now someone else was paying the price for his cowardice. He had to come forward, but he still did not trust the FBI to keep him alive long enough to testify. So he came to me because I was the only person he could trust, and he needed my help to do something that might get us both killed. I sat there in my basement looking at my son and trying to process everything he just told me. A corrupt prosecutor, a murder, a frame job, federal agents who could not be trusted. It sounded like something from a movie, except Caleb's hollow eyes and shaking hands told me it was real. I asked what he needed from me. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small thumb drive. He said the night of the murder, his phone had been recording. He used a voice memo app to practice patient notes from work. He forgot it was running when he pulled into that parking lot. The phone recorded everything. The argument, the gunshot, Krause's voice threatened him. All of it. When he ran, he saved the audio file to this thumb drive before destroying his phone. He had been carrying it for 6 months, not knowing what to do with it. If he gave it to the FBI, it would disappear into evidence, and Krause had enough connections to make sure it never saw a courtroom. But if we could get this recording to someone outside Krause's influence, someone with enough power and integrity to force a real investigation, then maybe this ended without Caleb dead and me in prison for helping him. I took the thumb drive and asked who he had in mind. Caleb said there was a federal judge named Eleanor DeMarco. She had a reputation for being incorruptible, and she hated prosecutors who abused their power. If we could get this recording directly to her, she could order an independent investigation that Krause could not stop. But Caleb could not do it himself. The moment he surfaced, the FBI would take him into custody, and this evidence would end up exactly where Krause wanted it. I had to do it. Tomorrow. I had to go to Judge DeMarco's chambers and convince her to listen. I stared at the thumb drive in my hand. It was so small. A piece of plastic barely bigger than my thumbnail. But it held evidence of murder, and it represented a choice I had to make. I had already broken the law by letting Caleb into my house. Now he wanted me to take evidence in a federal case directly to a judge without going through proper channels. I asked if what he was asking me to do was legal. Caleb said probably not, but it was the only way to save Anthony Lopez and stop Krause. I asked what would happen if I got caught. Caleb said I would probably go to prison. I asked what would happen to my other kids if that happened. Rebecca was in college. Danny was only 13. Caleb started crying. He said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I should not have come here. I should not have put this on you." But I did not know where else to go. I looked at my son crying on my basement couch, and I thought about Anthony Lopez sitting in jail for a crime he did not commit. I thought about Krause standing at that press conference smiling. I thought about my 2 other children who needed me. I thought about the 10 years in federal prison I was already facing just for opening my door tonight. I had already made one choice that might destroy my life. Now I had to decide if I was willing to make another one. I told Caleb I would do it. I would take the thumb drive to Judge DeMarco in the morning. He looked up at me with red eyes and said, "Are you sure?" I said no. I was not sure about anything except that I could not let an innocent man go to prison, and I could not let my son face this alone. He had come to me for help. What kind of mother turns her child away when he is desperate? Caleb hugged me, and I felt how thin he had gotten. I could feel his ribs through his jacket. I asked when he last ate a real meal. He said he could not remember. I went upstairs and made him food while he stayed hidden in the basement. At 4 a.m., I told Caleb he needed to sleep. I brought him blankets and pillows and watched him lie down on the couch. He was asleep within minutes. I sat on the basement stairs watching him and thinking about what tomorrow would bring. I had to get this recording to Judge DeMarco without the FBI knowing. I had to convince a federal judge to listen to a random elementary school teacher who showed up with wild accusations about a respected prosecutor. I had to do all of this while pretending everything was normal, so the surveillance team watching my house did not get suspicious. The odds of success felt impossible, but the alternative was watching my son run for the rest of his life while an innocent man rotted in prison. I went upstairs to my bedroom and tried to sleep. I could not. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. At 6 a.m., I gave up and got ready. I had to get Danny up for school and maintain my normal routine. The surveillance team knew my schedule. Any deviation would raise red flags. I made breakfast and packed Danny's lunch and drove him to school like it was any other Friday. Then, instead of going to work, I drove downtown toward the federal courthouse. The courthouse was a massive building that looked designed to intimidate anyone who entered. I parked 2 blocks away and walked. The thumb drive was in my purse in a zippered pocket. My heart was pounding so hard I felt dizzy. Security at the entrance made me put my bag through the X-ray machine. I held my breath while the guard studied the screen. He waved me through. I took the elevator to the 9th floor where Judge DeMarco's chambers were located. The hallway was quiet and lined with dark wood doors. I found her nameplate and stood outside trying to find courage. A woman opened the door before I could knock. She was in her 30s wearing a gray suit. She asked if she could help me. I said I needed to speak with Judge DeMarco about an urgent matter. The woman introduced herself as the judge's clerk. She said the judge did not take unscheduled meetings. I would need to file the proper motions. I said this could not wait. It was about a murder case and a prosecutor who killed someone. The clerk's expression shifted from polite to concerned. She told me to wait and close the door. I stood in that hallway for 12 minutes. Other people passed by, lawyers in expensive suits who looked at me like I did not belong. They were right. I was an elementary school teacher in a Target dress about to accuse a deputy district attorney of murder. This was insane. But I was here, and turning back now meant Caleb ran for nothing, and Anthony Lopez stayed in prison for nothing. The door opened again. The clerk said Judge DeMarco would give me 5 minutes. I followed her into a large office with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive desk. Judge DeMarco sat behind it. She was in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes. She gestured to a chair and told me to sit and explain quickly why I was interrupting her schedule. I sat down and pulled out the thumb drive. I told her everything. My son witnessed Deputy District Attorney Krause murder Victor Mendez. He ran because he did not trust the system to protect him. An innocent man named Anthony Lopez was in jail for Krause's crime. This recording proved everything. I needed her to listen to it and order an investigation before Krause realized what was happening. Judge DeMarco stared at me for a long moment. Then she asked why I brought this to her instead of the FBI. I said because I did not know who to trust. Because Krause had connections throughout law enforcement. Because my son tried going to the FBI 6 months ago, and it only made things worse. She asked where my son was right now. I hesitated. She said she was not asking to turn him in. She was asking because if this recording was real, my son was in danger, and so was I. I told her he was safe for now. She picked up the thumb drive and plugged it into her computer. She put on headphones and listened while I sat there trying not to pass out. Her face stayed neutral, but I saw her grip the edge of her desk. After several minutes, she took off the headphones. She said this recording, if authentic, showed clear evidence of murder and subsequent threats. She asked if I understood the position I had put myself in by harboring a fugitive. I said yes. She asked if I understood I could go to prison. I said yes. I said I would rather go to prison than watch my son die, or an innocent man stay locked up for something he did not do. Judge DeMarco picked up her phone and called someone named Inspector Walsh from the Office of Professional Responsibility. She told him to come to her chambers immediately. She said it involved a prosecutor and potential murder. She hung up and looked at me. She said I did a brave thing coming here, but the consequences were going to be complicated. I asked what would happen to Caleb. She said if the recording was authentic, OPR would take him into protective custody. Real protective custody, not the FBI's version. They would investigate Krause independently. But I needed to understand that my son would still face legal consequences for running. He was a material witness who fled. That was obstruction. I said I understood. I just wanted him alive. Inspector Walsh arrived 20 minutes later. He was a serious man in his 50s who listened to the recording twice while taking notes. When he finished, he looked at me and asked where Caleb was. I gave him my address. He made several calls using words like immediate response and secure location and corruption task force. He told me a team was being dispatched to my house right now. They would take Caleb into custody and bring him to OPR's secure facility. Then they would arrest Krause. I felt relief and terror at the same time. Relief that this was actually happening. Terror about what it meant for me. Walsh said we needed to discuss my situation. He explained I had committed federal crimes by harboring Caleb. The fact that I eventually did the right thing helped but did not erase the violations. Judge DeMarco interrupted. She said given the circumstances and the fact that I exposed serious corruption, she would recommend leniency, but she could not make promises. That was up to the prosecutor's office. Walsh said he would note in his report that I cooperated fully and brought crucial evidence forward. He said that should count for something, but I needed to prepare for the possibility of charges. I said I understood. He asked if I would give a formal statement. I said yes. I said I would tell them everything. They took me to the federal building and I spent 4 hours answering questions. They recorded everything. They asked me to repeat details multiple times. They wanted to know exactly what Caleb told me and when and why I chose to help him instead of calling authorities immediately. I told them the truth. He was my son and he was terrified and asking for help. What else could I have done? Around 3 p.m., Walsh came back and told me Caleb was in custody. He was safe and cooperating. OPR had also arrested Krause at his office an hour ago. The news was already breaking. I could see it on Walsh's tablet when he showed me. Deputy DA arrested for murder. I started crying and could not stop. Walsh told me to go home. Someone would contact me about my legal situation within a few days. He said I should be proud of what I did. I said I just wanted my son safe and an innocent man free. He said both those things were going to happen now. I drove home in a daze. The surveillance car was gone from my street. There were no more federal agents watching my house because they had what they needed. I went inside and walked to my basement. The blankets Caleb used were still on the couch. Evidence he had been here. Evidence of everything I risked. I sat down and let myself cry for real. Then I called my lawyer and told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet. Then she said, "Diana, you took an enormous gamble. You could still face prison. But I think you saved your son's life." I said I hoped that was true. She said we would know soon enough. 3 days later, the prosecutor dropped all charges against Anthony Lopez. I watched the news coverage showing him walking out of jail with his lawyer. He looked traumatized, but he was free. The reporter said new evidence proved Deputy DA Krause was the actual killer. Lopez was filing a wrongful prosecution lawsuit. I felt something close to peace watching that. One innocent man saved. Caleb was still in OPR custody, and I was not allowed contact. Walsh called once to say Caleb was doing well and would testify before the grand jury next week. He said Krause's lawyer was already trying to suppress the recording, but it would not work. The evidence was overwhelming. I asked when I could see my son. Walsh said not until after the grand jury proceedings. Maybe a few weeks. I said I could wait. 2 weeks after my meeting with Judge DeMarco, I received a letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office. I opened it expecting charges. Instead, it said after careful review, they decided not to prosecute me. My actions, while technically illegal, were mitigated by extraordinary circumstances and ultimately served justice. They were closing the investigation. I read it 3 times to believe it. I was not going to prison. My lawyer called it the right decision. I called it a miracle. 4 weeks after Caleb turned himself in, OPR released him from protective custody with conditions. He had to wear a monitoring bracelet and stay within the county until Krause's trial, but he could come home. I picked him up from the OPR facility on a Tuesday morning. He walked out looking healthier than the night he showed up at my house. He had gained weight and his face did not look so hollow anymore. We hugged in the parking lot and I told him I was proud of him for doing the right thing. He said he was sorry for putting me through everything. I said he had nothing to apologize for. We both made hard choices. We both did what we had to do. The trial happened 3 months later. Caleb testified for a full day. I sat in the courtroom gallery and watched him tell the truth about what he saw. The recording played in open court. You could hear the gunshot. You could hear Krause's threats. The jury took 4 hours to convict Krause of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life without parole. Watching them take Krause away in handcuffs felt like the ending I needed. 6 months after the trial, Caleb moved into his own apartment and went back to work. Anthony Lopez settled his lawsuit with the city for $2 million. I went back to teaching 3rd grade and tried to rebuild some sense of normal life. One evening, Caleb came over for dinner with Rebecca and Danny. We sat around my kitchen table like we used to before everything fell apart. Danny made jokes about his brother being on the news. Rebecca talked about her upcoming finals. Caleb told stories about difficult patients at the clinic. It felt almost normal. After dinner, Caleb asked to talk to me privately. We went to the porch and he said he had been in therapy working through everything that happened. His therapist helped him understand that I saved his life by opening that door. I told him we saved each other. He asked if I ever regretted it. I said no. Opening that door was the easiest decision I ever made. Everything that came after was complicated, but that moment when I turned the lock, that was simple. He was my son, and he needed help. That was all that mattered. We sat on that porch until late talking about the future instead of the past. For the first time in a year, the future felt like something worth talking about. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.